Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Shemini, begins on page 589 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, that is Vayikra chapter 9. And it states, it was on the eighth day Moshe summoned Aaron and his sons, the elders of Israel. So what's this eighth day? Our sages say that it's the eighth day of the Miluim, of the inauguration of the Mishkan of the Tabernacle, and it was actually fell on the first day of Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And if you look back in Parshas Tetzaveh, which is on page, well, Tetzaveh is a little earlier than this, but in the middle of Tetzaveh, on page 475, that's Shemos chapter 29, it states that, page 475, once again, this is the matter that you should do for them, meaning to the Kohanim, to sanctify them, to minister to me. They take one bull, two rams, unblemished, to give us the various offerings that they would bring and the rituals they would do. And on page 479 at the bottom, on page verse 35, and after giving everything that they would do, it says, you shall do thus for Aaron and for his sons, like everything that I've commanded you, for a 7-day period shall you inaugurate them. That the Kohanim would be inaugurated as this is what changed them from being a regular Levi to being a Kohen. And that was a 7-day period of inauguration where all these offerings were brought. And every single day of this inauguration, Moshe would set up the Mishkan and take it down. He would set up the tabernacle and take it down. Now, our Parsha, after having done that, our Parsha is on the 8th day, the day following that 7-day inauguration period, where the Kohanim are now full Kohanim, and the tabernacle is set up to remain standing until they travel next, and it would be taken back down. And so now this is the first day of the tabernacle functioning as normal, and they're doing an inauguration for the tabernacle. So he said to Aaron, verse 2, he said to Aaron, take for yourself a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for an elevation offering unblemished, and offer them before Hashem. And to the children of Israel speak as follows, take a he-goat for a sin offering and a calf and a sheep in their first year, unblemished, for an elevation offering. So the Ramban comments on these offerings, that these offerings were not mentioned in Parshas Tetzaveh with the inauguration of the Kohanim, and he says that's because that was about the inauguration of the Kohanim. At this point, the inauguration of the Kohanim is complete, and this is about the start of the Mishkan, the start of the tabernacle. But he does comment on the offerings that are brought, specifically the sin offerings, that it says Aaron brings a young bull as a sin offering, and for the people, it said he should speak as follows: take a he-goat for a sin offering. So there was a bull brought as a sin offering by Aaron, and a he-goat, a male goat, brought for the people as a sin offering. And later in the parsha, we'll see how it was processed, is that they were that both of these sin offerings were burnt outside the camp; they weren't burnt on the altar. And he says this very closely actually follows the Yom Kippur service. In the Yom Kippur service, also a bull was brought as the offering for the Kohanim, for the Kohen Gadol, and a he-goat was brought as the offering for the Bnei Yisrael. So the Ramban says that our sages say that this bull that Aaron was bringing was to atone for the role that he played in the golden calf, but the goat that the children of Israel is bringing is interesting. Because, some say that it's to atone for the offering that was brought to the golden calf. But the Ramban brings, I don't know what exactly to do with this, but he brings a medrash. It's a sifra that says that the children of Israel said that as we're starting the Mishkan, we have to look at the beginning and look at the end. And it says at the beginning, the end, they say that they sinned with the golden calf, that they said, let us make a calf, etc. But he says the beginning was that that when they sold Yosef, when the brothers, the patriarchs of the tribes, sold Yosef, it says that they slaughtered a he-goat and dipped the coat of fine wool, the coat of many colors, into the blood of the he-goat, so his father, and show it to their father, and the father would say he must have been torn apart by a wild animal. And they said to atone for, and they seem to connect that to these offerings, that Aaron's bringing a bull for his part in the golden calf, and they're bringing a goat for the selling of Yosef. So what's the connection? And I'm thinking perhaps is that these were really the two sins that we committed as a people to this point. Is that as a people, the brothers together, the tribes together, decided to sell Yosef. And that was really all of them, other than Yosef and Binyamin, who weren't there. And they at least were involved in a conspiracy to kill Yosef, to throw him in the pit, to sell Yosef, whatever it was. So that was the first sin of us that we had as a people, was the sale of Yosef. And the second sin as a people was the golden calf. So as we were having our first chance at atonement, the first day that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, is functional, so we brought an offering for both of those two things. And the Medrash seems to say also that if you look at the elevation offering for the children of Israel in verse 3, and to the children of Israel speak as follows: take a he-goat for a sin offering, and a calf and a sheep in the first year, unblemished, for an elevation offering, that calf is also, the elevation offering is some atonement for the sin of the golden calf. Okay. And there's a peace offering, etc. So in verse 5, they took what Moshe had commanded to the front of the tent of meeting, and the entire assembly approached and stood before Hashem. Moshe said, "This is the thing that Hashem has commanded you to do, then the glory of Hashem will appear to you." And in verse 7, Moshe said to Aaron, "Come near to the altar and perform the service for your sin offering, your elevation offering." So Rashi speaks out at what's this? Come near to the altar. Come near to the altar. Why is he telling him to approach? He could have, do the service that we told you to do. So Rashi says that Aaron was afraid. He was like shamed and afraid to approach the altar. And Moshe said to him, "Why are you ashamed of this? This is what you were chosen for. You were chosen to be the Kohen Gadol, to do this service." And the Ramban elaborates. He brings the Medrash that the altar in Aaron's mind took the form of a calf, of an ox, and he was afraid to come close. That it looked like this crouching ox that you don't want to. Those things are, and he was afraid to approach until Moshe told him to go. And the Ramban explains that what this means is that in Aaron's mind, Aaron was so righteous that really there was one sin that he was involved with, and that was the part that he played in the golden calf. So that was constantly on his mind, that he had that guilt associated with that. And when it came time for him to triumph as being the high priest of the Jewish people, the ritual leader of the Jewish people, so in his mind, he couldn't do it, that he was not worthy because of that sin. And that's what it means that the altar took the appearance of an ox in his mind, is that the thought of the golden calf was on his mind and was stopping him from approaching. And Moshe told him that you were chosen for this, indicates that you were forgiven for that. And okay, so he came close and he did the service, and it describes the service exactly how it was done. And like we said on page 591, verse 11, verse 10, the fats, the kidneys, the diaphragm with the liver of the sin offering he caused to go up and smoke in the altar, as Hashem had commanded Moshe, and the flesh and the hide he burnt in the fire outside the camp, just like the bull of Yom Kippur, that the body, other than the parts, the fats and the organs that were burnt on the altar, the rest was burnt outside the camp. And then he brought the elevation offering. And then in verse 15, he brought the offering, he brought near the offering of the people, and he took the sin offering goat that was for the people and slaughtered it and performed the sin offering service as for the first one, meaning just like the bull that he brought, that one was also, the body and hide was burnt outside the camp. And then he brought the rest of the offerings as he was instructed. And then in verse 22, on page 591, Aaron raised his hands towards the people and blessed them. Then he descended from having performed the sin offering, the elevation offering, the peace offering. So what's this blessing that Aaron performed. So our sages say that it's the Birkas Kohanim, the blessing. It says he raised his hands and blessed them. That indicates that he gave Birkas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. So even though the blessing of the Kohanim, we actually find the blessing of the Kohanim much later in the Torah, but it's the Ramban explains that it's very clear in the way the verses read that it was actually commanded earlier. And maybe we should see that. So if you go to Bamidbar 6:24, so that is chapter 6 in Bamidbar. I'll get you a page number in a minute. In Pahaloscha or Nasar. And Nasa on page 763. So on page 763 in the article Stone Chumash, that's Bamidbar chapter 6, verse 22. It says, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, so shall you bless the children of Israel, saying of them, may Hashem bless you and safeguard you, may Hashem illuminate his countenance for you and be gracious to you, may Hashem lift his countenance to you and establish the peace to you, let them place my name upon the children of Israel, and I shall bless them. So this is the first time in the Torah where we actually find the blessing of the Kohanim, which is much later than our Parsha. But if you look at the next words of the Torah in chapter 7, on page 765, it says, it was on the day that Moshe finished erecting the tabernacle that he anointed it, sanctified it, and all its utensils. So we're already going back. So we see that this actually preceded our Parsha, which is that day that Moshe had finished erecting the tabernacle. So the Ramban just says, even though that's actually written later in the Torah, but you actually see that the Torah is not necessarily in chronological order, and that actually took place before our Parsha. Okay, just so Aaron did Birkas Kohanim at this point. He gave the blessing of the Kohanim. Then in verse 23 it says, Moshe and Aaron came to the tent of meeting, and they went out and they blessed the people, and the glory of Hashem appeared to the entire people. So what's this? What did he do there? It says they came to the tent of meeting and they went out. So what did they do there? They came and then they went. So Rashi quotes a medrash that said that Moshe taught him the ketoras, the incense, which was done inside the tent of meeting. That was done in the golden altar, which was inside the tent of meeting. But Rashi quotes another medrash is that they after doing the entire all the rituals that he was commanded to do, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, did not yet rest on the Mishkan, on the tabernacle. So what did they do? So they entered the tabernacle to pray. And then it says, and then they went out, they blessed the people, and the glory of Hashem appeared to the entire people. Then the Shekhinah, after they prayed and came back out, then the divine presence rested on the tabernacle.
At that point, was Aaron done with feeling bad about what he had done?
I don't know if he ever was completely done with that, but he at least accepted that he was the chosen as the Kohen Gadol, and he was doing this. He was doing the service, it seems, and accepted that at least. Okay, and it says, so what happened in verse 24? A fire went forth from before Hashem, consumed upon the altar the elevation offering, the fats. The people saw and sang glad song and fell on their faces. That these things were arranged on the altar, but there was no fire there, and a fire came down from heaven and lit the piles of wood, and lit the pyre, and it consumed all their offerings. Okay, so then, back to the beginning of the Parsha on page 589. The Parsha begins, it was on the 8th day, and the Hebrew is Vayehi. So the Gemara in Megillah, talking about Megillus Esther, the Megillah we read on Purim also begins with Vayehi, and it was in the days of Achashverosh. And the Talmud says that anytime it says, and it was, that word Vayehi, there's always an ominous connotation. It means that something bad is coming. And the Gemara asks, what about this day of great celebration that it was on the 8th day? The Gemara says that's the death of Nadav and Avihu, that was from the beginning that was coming. And that was always coming. And that's why it's what's that? Yes. Came on that first day of the it's clear In the narrative, it's very clear. So let's see what happens here. So on page 593, chapter 10, the sons of Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu each took his fire pan. They put fire in them and placed incense upon it. And they brought before Hashem an alien fire that he had not commanded them. A fire came forth from before Hashem and consumed them, and they died before Hashem. And there's a number of different commentaries what exactly that means that they brought an alien fire before Hashem. That some say that that they brought the incense into the Holy of Holies, where even the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to bring it before Yom Kippur. Others say that they brought it on the inner altar, even though they hadn't been commanded yet to do that. Others say though that that the problem was the what makes it alien. This is actually brought in a note on page 593 on verse 1. It says Rabbi Kiva holds that the fire was literally alien because it did not come from the altar, meaning that the mitzvah was to bring coals from the altar, and you put the incense on those coals, but they brought their own coals, not from the altar. And that was their mistake. Whatever it is, but they did the incense service in the way they weren't supposed to, and a fire came from before Hashem and consumed them. Okay. So there's a lot of midrashim on this incident, and the Kli Yakar quotes a bunch of them. That one of the midrashim says that their mistake was that they died because they decided a halacha in front of their teachers, meaning in front. Moshe and Aaron were the leaders of the generation, and they decided to bring this incense offering in spite of not having been taught that by their teachers, meaning they decided on halacha, they decided that this should be brought without consulting with in spite of not being taught that by their teachers. Another medrash says it was because they were killed because they entered intoxicated. They had drunk wine in celebration of this day and entered the holies in a state of intoxication, having drunk wine. Other medrashim say that they said that when are these elders, these old men, Moshe and Aaron, going to die, and we could take over and lead the people? That they were looking for, and they were saying such things, and that's why they died. And others say it's because they never got married, because they felt that there was no woman that was appropriate for them on their level. They felt that they were above any possible partner in life. And so some say it's that all these things are connected to their bringing this alien fire, meaning that they decided halacha in front of their rebbes that they brought this alien fire, and they came in intoxicated, and that kind of allowed them to make this mistake, or gave them the bravado to make this mistake. And they were saying, when are these people going to die and we could lead? And that led them to want to lead. But the Kli Yakar said that you could also understand in a allegorical sense that this strange fire that they brought before Hashem represents the fire burning within themselves, and that was the fire of arrogance. That there was a level of gaiva, of arrogance, burning within themselves that was really that was the consuming reason why that they ended up being killed by this heavenly, once again, it was a heavenly fire that consumed them, but it was because of this arrogance within them that they approached Hashem in a spirit of arrogance rather than a spirit of humility, and that was really the cause of all these things. What's that?
Could the incense have been the wrong combination?
That I've never seen. I've never seen that it was actually made wrong. That those who say that it was wrong was that they did the meaning ritually they weren't commanded to do it, when they did it or how they did it, but not that it was actually a wrong.
They brought the coals in.
Right.
Not necessarily, because the incense goes on.
Right. And that's one of the problems. Right. That's actually one of the problems that I think the Ramban asks on those who say that it was that they brought it when, like, the incense when they weren't commanded, that he said it doesn't say that it was ketorah zara. It doesn't say it was an alien incense. It says that it was an alien fire. And I saw that they actually make that claim that can't be what it was.
I guess part of the arrogance was that also they're gonna make their own rules.
Yes, exactly. And that's what led them to this, is that they weren't following the rules. They came up with their own, they had their own ideas, and that burnt within them. And I heard from my father that you really have two lessons in a row in the Torah. The first one is that, like we said, that Moshe and Aaron did all the rituals. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, didn't rest in the tabernacle, and then they went into the tabernacle to pray, and then the divine presence came down. And then you have this incident with Nadav and Avihu. And I heard from my father that this is to teach us that if you have, they did all the rituals right. They followed all the rules exactly, but that didn't bring the Shekhinah. That didn't bring the divine presence. There has to be prayer, which is avodah shebelev. That's the service of the heart. Meaning that if doing the motions without putting one's heart into it, without without the prayer, the heart, doesn't bring the Shekhinah, doesn't bring the divine presence. Okay, so where were we here? Okay, so let's move on from this. The next so that's where I was, right. So we were saying that if a person's if that the actions without the heart doesn't bring the Shekhinah, doesn't bring the divine presence, but then you have the opposite, that Nadav and Avihu did what they weren't commanded. They brought an alien fire. They did against the ritual. They did rituals that they weren't commanded. It was all heart. Meaning it was, I'm going to do the service my way. I'm so inspired that I'm going to find my own approach in the service. And they were burnt, they were consumed by fire. And that the opposite, the all heart without boundaries, without the boundaries of ritual and doing it the way that we're commanded, that's playing with fire. Okay, so now moving on.
Morning about that statement here.
Mm-hmm. Right here. But first, one more thing I wanted to say, a few more things on that before we get to that. In verse 3, Moshe said to Aaron, of this did Hashem speak, saying, I'll be sanctified through those who are nearest me, thus I will be honored before the entire people, and Aaron was silent. What does this mean, I will be sanctified through those who are nearest me? He said he was expecting something bad to happen that day. And that's because, remember, this is the day that they got the tabernacle, and they have a way of being forgiven for sins. It's almost like if they come up with the magic medicine that will take away any disease, like the ultimate medicine, the snake oil that everyone sells that gets rid of everything, gets rid of diabetes. They have stuff that gets rid of obesity now, and it's amazing. It heals everything. So then people don't have any incentive to take care of themselves because whatever they do, we have this stuff that'll get rid of any illness, any bad health. And when they have the Mishkan, they have the tabernacle, they have this way of getting forgiveness. They're forgiven for the sin. They see that the people might think, okay, we don't have to worry about sinning anymore because we have this way to get out of it. So he's saying there, Moshe understood that there had to be some kind of demonstration that sinning, that it's still dangerous, that you can't sin, and Hashem is kind and gives us a way to atone for sin, but ultimately there's going to be a price paid. And that's what I'll be sanctified through those who are nearest me. And thus I'll be honored before the entire people. People understand that this is very serious. And another thing is they understand the sanctity of the tabernacle is that we have the holiest place in the world, and the holiest place, it has to be treated with the proper dignity and the proper respect, and all the avodah, all the service we do there has to be done with the utmost respect and the utmost seriousness, and any lacking of that is dangerous, and that's what was demonstrated here. Okay, and then it says that Moshe summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uziel, and said to them, approach, carry your brothers out of the sanctuary to the outside of the camp. So the Gemara, some ask, why was it that Mishael and Elzaphan were told to take them out and not Elazar and Isamar, meaning Nadav and Avihu had brothers to take care of them, And a Kohen is allowed to become impure through contact with a brother. So why were their brothers not taking them out? Why did they have to get their cousins who are Levium, not Kohanim, to take them out? So there's answers about how this day they almost had the status of a Kohen Gadol. Some say that this is, but I saw Reb Shimon Schwab, I think, says based on kind of a Meshech Chachma, is that that this was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The time for the Korban Pesach was approaching. If they would have become impure through contact with the dead, so then they would not have been eligible. They would have been tamei, impure, and would not have been able to bring the Korban Pesach. And how many Kohanim were there at this point? There were three. There were Aaron and two of his sons. Two had just died. So there's Aaron, Elazar, and Isamar. So if Elazar and Isamar became impure through contact with the dead, then there would be just Aaron to bring all the Pesach offerings for all the Bnei Yisrael. So they had to avoid that. Okay. Okay, and like Herbie said in verse 6, it says, Moshe said to Aaron, to his sons Elazar and Isamar, do not leave your heads unshorn, do not rend your garments, that you not die. And he become wrathful with the entire assembly, your brethren, the entire house of Israel shall bewail the conflagration that Hashem ignited. Do not leave the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die, for the oil of Hashem's anointing is upon you. And they carried out Moshe's bidding. So they were commanded, everything's worked out, Baruch Hashem. Okay, so they were commanded not to act in mourning, and this teaches us some of the laws of mourning, that they were told, don't leave your heads unshorn. So that means that a regular mourner cannot cut their hair, and do not tear your clothes. That tells us that a regular mourner would tear their clothes, and that's one of the sources. And as it says, because if they showed mourning, then everyone would mourn, and this is the day of the inauguration of the tabernacle. It's not a day of mourning. Okay, then on page 595, verse 8, Hashem spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink intoxicating wine, you, your sons with you, when you come to the tent of meeting, that you not die. This is an eternal decree for your generation. So the Ramban points out, this is based on on Rashi, who says that it says, don't drink wine and intoxicating beverages, and Rashi understands that means wine that is intoxicating. But that means that there's no commandment specifically against drinking some good scotch, because that's not wine. The Ramban quotes this and seems to agree with it, but he says the Rambam actually decides that anything intoxicating would also invalidate a Kohen doing the service. And it continues, do not drink intoxicating wine, you and your sons with you, when you come to the tent of meeting, that you not die. This is an eternal decree for your generations, in order to distinguish between the sacred, the profane, between the contaminated and the pure, and to teach the children of Israel all the decrees that Hashem had spoken to them to Moshe. From this we learn that not only is it to do the service in the temple that one can't do after having drunk intoxicating wine, but even to decide halacha, in order to distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and to decide halacha, to make decisions. It is also prohibited when one when one is intoxicated. And as a student of Rav Moshe Feinstein told me, for this reason, Rav Moshe Feinstein would not drink wine on Purim, because in case a big halachic question came up on Purim, he would not drink wine, but because of this opinion of Rashi, he would drink vodka. So he would drink vodka, he wouldn't allow himself to become intoxicated, but he would drink less vodka. Well, he was Russian, so that could be a lot. But he didn't drink enough to become intoxicated, but he would not drink wine, because he felt if he drank wine, then he wouldn't be allowed to make halachic decisions. And he always, in case any big question came up, he had to be available, because he was the kind of the final destination for any halachic question. Okay, so then they continued. They were commanded to eat the disposition of the day's offerings, as our scroll says on page 595, verse 12. They were commanded, in spite of being an onen, that they were mourners, that their Aaron's sons and Elazar and Isamar's brothers had just died. They were commanded to eat the offerings, which would normally be prohibited to a mourner and an onen specifically. But In verse 16, it says, "The Moshe inquired insistently about the he-goat of the sin offering, for behold, it had been burnt," meaning it had not been eaten by Aaron in a sense. "And he was wrathful with Elazar and Isamar, Aaron's remaining sons, saying, Why did you not eat the sin offering in a holy place, for it is most holy? And he gave it to you to gain forgiveness for the sin of the assembly, and to atone for them before Hashem. Behold, its blood was not brought into the sanctuary within. You should have eaten it in the holy as I had commanded." He said that offering you should have eaten. Why was it burnt? And in verse 19, Aaron spoke to Moshe, "Was it they who this day offered their sin offering and their elevation offering before Hashem? Now that such things befell me, were I to eat this day's sin offering, would Hashem approve?" And Moshe heard and he approved. So what was Aaron's argument? So the commentaries say that the reasoning why they didn't eat it was because it wasn't, they understood that it was the inauguration offerings that were meant to be eaten. And this sin offering, this goat of the sin offering, actually was a Rosh Chodesh offering, not a specific offering for the inauguration, because one of the offerings brought as the Musaf for Rosh Chodesh is the Seir L'Chaper, we say in the Musaf for Rosh Chodesh, is a he-goat for atonement that was brought every Rosh Chodesh. So they understood that this was a Rosh Chodesh offering, and it was only the inauguration offerings that they should eat, not the regular days offerings like the Rosh Chodesh offerings. And Moshe heard and he approved. And this is telling us the praise of Moshe, that in spite of the fact Moshe was the leader of the Jewish people and the one who conveyed the laws from Hashem, when he heard an argument that he couldn't argue with, he agreed. He was silent. He heard it and said, "You're right." No arguing, no stubbornness. He heard an argument. "You're right," and stepped down and stepped back. Okay, and now the parsha concludes with the laws of kosher eating and ritual purity. It begins with, on chapter 11, page 597, chapter 11, Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the animals that are upon the earth. Everything among the animals that has a split hoof, which is completely separated into double hooves, that brings up its cud." So for land animals, like mammals, so meaning not birds or insects or anything of that nature, and not fish or sea water creatures. So we could eat what has split hooves. That means it has two toes completely split, and it chooses cud, meaning that it chooses food. It goes into stomach, partially digests, then it regurgitates and then chews it again. It digests in another stomach. They're called, I think, ruminants or something like that in English. So those we may eat, like a cow, a sheep, a goat, a deer, a buffalo, a giraffe, things of that nature. So there are domesticated animals, wild animals that are kosher. Antelopes, goat, yes. But in verse 4, "But this is what you shall not eat from among those that bring up their cud or that have split hooves. The camel," meaning, then these are lists of things that have one but not the other. So the camel, for it brings up its cud, but its hoof is not split. And the hyrax, for it brings up its cud, but its hoof is not split. It's some kind of small, like rabbit-like creature. Yeah. And the hare, it's like some kind of rabbit, for it brings up its cud, but its hoof is not split. And the pig, which is the opposite, for its hoof is split, but its hoof is split, and its hoof is completely separated, meaning on the outside it looks kosher. A pig looks kosher on the outside. It has that hoof, the two toes completely split, but it does not chew its cud. It is unclean to you. You shall not eat, nor shall, etc. Okay, now in the water, everything that has fin, in verse 9, everything that has fins and scales in the water and the seas and the streams, those you may eat. And anything that does not have fins and scales in the seas and streams, from all that teems in the water, for all the living creatures in the water, they are abomination to you. Notice it doesn't say every fish. We're not talking about the scientific designation of classification of fish. This is anything in the water, all water creatures. So that includes crabs and lobsters and oysters and whales and porpoises and dolphins. These are all water, everything that is in the water. So all those are not kosher because they do not have scales or fins and scales. And our sages say that everything that any animal, any fish, I should say, that has scales, you could assume that it also had fins. And so even if you don't see fins, but if it had scales, you could assume there are fins and it's kosher. So if you see a fillet of fish with the skin and the scales attached, you know that came from a kosher fish, even though it doesn't have fins attached to that fillet. There might be problems with the knife that was used, but that's dealable with to talk to a rabbi if that's an issue. Okay, so that's water creatures. And then in verse 13, we have the birds. There's a list of birds that the Torah gives on page 601, the Nesher, the Paris, Osnia, the Da, the Aya, according to its kind, every Orev, which is generally understood to be a raven, according to its kind, the Basayana, Tachma, Shachaf, Nates, the Kos, Shalach, Yanshuf, the Shems. These are all a list of names that we don't necessarily know what each one is. And for that reason, our custom is that we will not eat any bird that we don't have a tradition that it was eaten by Jewish communities. And there are some that are even that there are disagreements about. There are some that are unclear. One of them is the turkey, that there's actually some people that will not eat the turkey because they don't trust whatever traditions there are that it was eaten by Jewish communities. What's that? Yes, but
Turkey wasn't.
yeah, it wasn't it was a New World bird, right? It was in the Western Hemisphere. So it's very unclear why it's kosher, but for whatever it became the overwhelming custom now, people eat turkey. And unless you have a custom not to, there are people who have a custom not to eat turkey, but unless you have a custom not to, you're allowed to eat it. The guinea hen, I think, is also one of those that there was a lot of questions in the early days of guinea hen. I don't know what it is, but in the early days of the Jews in America. Okay. So basically,
They're probably extinct because I
Yeah.
gave Da as it's spelled.
Yeah.
Aya into Google and I got nothing.
yeah. We don't necessarily know what each one is. If you look in the I don't know if the art scroll even gives ideas. The art scroll does give ideas for some of them. So it's like Paris is a vulture, the Nesher is an eagle.
Prey,
Right. A lot of them are birds of prey.
Yeah.
But the ostrich, the sparrowhawk, right, might be an owl or something. Right. Okay. So so moving on. So that's with birds. Basically, don't eat a bird unless it has a hechsher on it. The problem is that eggs, you could eat eggs that come from a kosher bird, but not that come from a non-kosher bird. So this is where knowing which birds are kosher are important. And there are actually some of them, the names that they give birds are not necessarily scientifically accurate. Meaning that one of them that I know is the what's it called? The quail. I mentioned this. The quail is that they had quail in Europe, and those quail, especially the Coturnix, I think it's called quail, might be confusing two things. But there's a species of quail, they call it Pharaoh's quail, that's kosher. That's the quail that we had in the desert. That's kosher. But when the pilgrims came to America, they saw a bird that reminded them of the quail that they knew in Europe and called it quail. But it's really completely unrelated type of bird, species of bird, and that's not kosher. And its eggs are not kosher because it's not a kosher bird. So when dealing with eggs specifically, because birds, like you're not going to get a bird, you're not going to get without a hechsher. But yeah.
Anyway, their eggs are kosher.
Right. There are kosher quail eggs, and they're not kosher quail eggs. Like I think it's called bobwhite quail or something, is an American species that they named quail, but isn't really true quail, and it's not kosher. Okay. Anyway, so next thing we have in verse 20, of every flying teeming creature that walks on four legs and is an abomination to you, etc. There is one kind of insect that's kosher. And in verse 22, you may eat these from among them, the arbe according to its kind, the salam according to its kind, the chargol according to its kind, the chagav according to its kind. These are kinds of locusts or grasshoppers, but there are some kinds that are kosher. And there are some communities, I think the Yemenite community has a tradition. Which ones?
Moroccan and Yemenite Jews preserve their ancient traditions
regarding these, which grasshoppers or locusts are kosher. And there's a movement now amongst like the environmentalists to eat crickets and to use crickets as a protein source. And it's supposed to be like a very environmentally have a low environmental impact for eating meat as like eating cricket powder. So
chocolate covered grasshopper.
yeah, yeah, and it's not yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not necessarily unkosher from the Torah. Okay, then we have the halachas of ritual impurity. They're very complicated. Um, one of them, where are we here? Verse 29, on page 603, verse 29, this is the most commonly mentioned one, is in Hebrew it's called the sheretz. It's like the creepy crawly creature. That these are the contaminated ones among the teeming animals that teem upon the earth, the choled, achbar, tzav, the anach, the koach, the lata'a, the chomet, and the tinshemes. These are 6 types of like creepy crawly creatures that when they're dead, they transmit ritual impurity, a special ritual impurity. Again, these are small animals. They're like usually like weasels, usually. Right. These are mostly like rodent or rodent-like creatures, like a mouse and a weasel and the rat, like that. These also, when these transmit ritual impurity when they're dead. And then in verse 33, we have laws of earthen, or we have throughout this, we have laws of like different things that are susceptible to ritual impurity. And it's prohibited to eat these creatures. And then on page 607, verse 44, states, "For I am Hashem your God, you are to sanctify yourself and be holy, for I am holy. And you shall not contaminate yourself through any teeming thing that creeps upon the earth." Did I miss something I wanted to say?
Relative short part.
Yeah, it's 91 psukim. It's not as long as some others. But for I am Hashem who elevates you from the land of Egypt to be a God unto you. You shall be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animal, the bird, every living creature that swarms in the water, and every creature that teems on the ground, to distinguish between the contaminated and the pure, between the creature that may be eaten and the creature that may not be eaten. So here we have the laws of, first of all, which animals we're allowed to eat, and I kind of skipped over it, but also the laws of ritual impurity, because that's really a whole topic for a whole class that's I can't really cover right now. But okay, shkoyach. Everyone have a great Shabbos.